There are 6 internal boards. You've got 3 new sources for the summing amp that goes into the VCF. So instead of normally on the monotribe, you've only got VCO1 and noise and any external input coming in. You've got 3 sources going into the VCF, and I've added 3 more, which is a second oscillator, VCO2, the pulse width modulation source, and also a sub-oscillator. VCO2 can be driven a number of different ways. You can set it to track VCO1, so it's playing exactly the same notes or the same range of notes, but tuned slightly different. You can have it set to manual. Basically, then it'll just be putting out a tone, a single tone that you change with tuning. Or in the new version, version 2, you now can use an external CV coming in to control VCO2. So you can have VCO1 playing one melody set internally by the sequencer, but you could have a second melody coming in via CV from some external device, external sequencer. You can also, since the monotribe has CV input for VCO1, you can have a sequencer that's generating, a polyphonic sequencer that's generating 2 sets of control voltages and sending one of them to VCO1 and one of them to VCO2. The pulse width modulation and the sub-os can take as their source either VCO1 or 2, so you can basically have them track either or. So it's basically, you have a second voice and you can double that voice. You can double or triple the voice of either VCO1 or VCO2, or double both of them. The drum mods remain the same as they were in version 1. You have decay on each of the bass drum, snare drum, kick, snare drum, noise, and hi-hat, and you've got little switches here which can turn off the drum immediately from the mix, and it also can switch the drum to the individual outputs that you've got here at the back. So those remain the same as version 1, and the sub-os has a couple of new little features added. It now has a third output. Before it just had 1 octave down square and 2 octave down square. I've added 2 octave down pulse, which has, kind of interesting harmonics, a combination of 1 and 2. It also has an off switch, so you can shut it off here without having to turn the volume knob up here, which is really handy. I had that in version 1. That feature was only for VCO2, and it now is in the sub-oscillator and also in the pulse width modulator. You can turn it off right here. So you can have volume set, relative volume set that you like, and then you can just throw things in and out of the mix by these switches, which makes it very handy, especially when jamming with the thing, playing live or recording live. So the input-output jacks are the major changes with this version 2, and that is, I used to have the 3 drum trigger outputs, bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat on these jacks. They've now been doubled onto the sound output jack, so you've got the tip is trigger and the ring is sound on bass, snare, and high, and you've also got added now a mixed trigger output, which is basically an OR gate with these 3 triggers together. So you can have a sequencer or something else running from the mixed trigger out, which is getting a trigger on every single drum output that you have set. These 3 inputs, these 3 jacks, which were now made free by doubling these, have now been used for CV inputs, which allows you all kinds of patching capability with version 2. So you've got cutoff frequency in for the VCF. You can control that with 0 to 5 volts. You've got 2 external 0 to 5 volt CV inputs, which can be routed to 5 different things. External 1 can be routed to either control the VCA, or it can be used to control the rhythm attenuator. So basically you can control the volume of the filter and amplifier out, on the monotribe, the rhythm is a separate output that's added in later in a mixer It's not affected by this volume controller VCA, but I've added this attenuator, rhythm attenuator, which allows you to, frequency modulate or amplitude modulate the rhythm track. So that's for external 1 input. It can be routed to either or, both of those places, and external 2 input can be routed to one of 3 places or a combination of the 3, and that is as a modulation input on the pulse width modulator, so you can modulate VCO1 or VCO2 with external 2 control voltage in, and also has 2 possible routings to VCO2. You can now use it as the control voltage input for VCO2, which means you can have a separate, voice, a separate sequence, melody playing on VCO2 that then is playing on VCO1, and that's DC. And you can also frequency modulate VCO2 with external 2, and that one is AC coupled, so you can use, you can create nice effects with voice or other instruments coming in, and just the AC part of the wave is modulating VCO2. The last big change from version 1 is that the LEDs in the little micro switches are now, instead of, in version 1 they were always on, and now they are being driven depending on their purpose. So for example, click and pop is off, that LED is off if the click and pop is turned off. If it's on low, you've got a green LED, and if it's on high, you've got red. So you can quickly visually see if click and pop is on or off. And then these 3 switches are now, the LEDs are now being driven by whatever waveform is being routed through the switch. So right now you can see these 2 switches are off because they're switched to external 1 input, and I've got nothing plugged into external 1 CV. You can see this one is blinking because that's the envelope generator. That's the input to the VCA, and I've got the sequencer running right now. I have the sound levels turned down, so you're not hearing anything, but the waveform is being generated nonetheless. And if I, for example, if I would throw these switches over to the left, that's the triangle wave from VCO2, and that is of course always running. So you will see them light up. They're lighting up based on the fact that it's a very, it's a high frequency waveform, so the LED looks just lit. But for example, if I switch VCO2 to LFO mode, you'll see that's starting to blink at the frequency of the LFO. So these switches are much better indicators now and visual indicators of what they're doing. So just a quick demo of the basic features. I turn it on. This is VCO1. This is stock monotribe coming out right now. If I throw in VCO2, VCO2 is just set to manual tone right now, so it'll be a solid frequency. If I throw in sub-os, I've got it set to follow VCO2, so 1 octave down square, that's 2 octave down pulse, 1 octave down square wave, 2 octave down square. And if I throw in pulse width modulation, so it's following VCO1, hi-hat.